Today's lecture is a heart. Heart is made up of cardiac muscles and it is conical in shape because it is cone-like. The upper side is broader and the lower side is narrower. So it is cone-like, that is why it is known as conical shape. Now we come towards the structure and function of the heart. So the heart has four chambers, a right atrium, left atrium, right ventricle and left ventricle, and some valves and some vessels are related with these four chambers. So this is the superior vena cava and this one is the inferior vena cava. Superior vena cava and inferior vena cava brings the blood into the right atrium. When the right atrium contracts, the blood is pushed into the right ventricle, and when the right ventricle contracts, the blood is pushed into the left lung and right lung via the pulmonary artery. After that, when the blood is oxygenated in the lungs, that blood comes via the right pulmonary veins and left pulmonary veins into the left atrium, and when the left atrium contracts, the blood is pushed into the left ventricle, and when the left ventricle contracts, the blood is pushed into the aorta to the whole body. And you might have noticed the lub-dub sound of the heart. So why this lub-dub sound is produced? So when the ventricles contracts, the blood is pushed into the lungs via the pulmonary artery and into the aorta via the bicuspid or mitral valve. So at that time, this tricuspid valve and bicuspid valve is closed for preventing the backflow of the blood into the right atrium and left atrium. So the closing of this tricuspid valve and bicuspid valve produce a sound that is known as a lub. And when the ventricles relax, the blood comes into the right ventricle and left ventricle via the tricuspid valve and bicuspid valve, but at that time the pulmonary valve and aortic valve get closed for preventing the backflow of the blood into the right ventricle and left ventricle. So the closing of pulmonary valve and aortic valve produce a sound that is known as dub. So heart produces sounds like lub-dub, lub-dub. Now we come towards the vessels in the real heart. So this is the real mammalian heart, and this is the inferior vena cava, which looks like a thin membrane, but this is not a thin membrane, this is inferior vena cava, and this one is the superior vena cava. So this one is the superior vena cava and this one here is the inferior vena cava. This superior vena cava and inferior vena cava brings the blood into the right atrium, and when the right atrium contracts, the blood is pushed into the right ventricle, and when the right ventricle contracts, the blood is pushed into the lungs via the pulmonary artery, and this one is the pulmonary artery which is very adjacent to the aorta. This one is the pulmonary artery, and this one which is adjacent to the pulmonary artery is known as aorta, which is very thick walled. Now when the blood is oxygenated in the lungs, that blood comes via the pulmonary veins into the left ventricle. These are the left pulmonary veins and these are the right pulmonary veins, which brings the blood into the left atrium, and when the left atrium contracts, the blood is pushed into the left ventricle, and when the left ventricle contracts, the blood is pushed into the aorta, and this one is the aorta which distributes the blood in the whole body. So this is the structure and function of the heart. If you like this video, share this video with your friends and family members and subscribe the channel. Thank you so much.